Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
It's time to stand up, speak out, get involved, and let's be intentional.
Hello and welcome to Intentional. I am your host, Mick Meow. Thanks for taking some time to be with us today. I am really glad that you are tuning in, and I pray that you are blessed beyond belief wherever you are. Now, if you are catching the show live right now, please be sure to drop a comment in the chat group. We'd love to be able to connect with you. Also, please do a little subscribing, hit the like button, send out this interview and video everywhere that you can on every platform. We really appreciate you doing that for us. Before we jump into today's interview, if you are a teacher, if you are a police officer, a first responder, or just simply a good Samaritan on the road, because of the massive fentanyl crisis that is plaguing our nations, we need to be prepared on how to combat it. So please watch this ad. Hey, I want to be real serious with you. One of the biggest scourges caused by the open border crisis is the flow of uncontrolled fentanyl. 70% of last year's overdose deaths were attributed to fentanyl. It is 100 times more potent than morphine. 2 grains can and will kill you. At the Fentanyl Test, they have created the first test that can detect deadly fentanyl down to 1 nanogram per milliliter. Because every life is precious. Go to thefentanyltest.com and use promo code MEOW for your 10% discount off your order today. Well, folks, it's time for us to be intentional, so let's get to it. In case you missed it, the wrongful death trial of Grace Schera versus Ascension Healthcare concluded last week. It is live streamed in totality on the Children's Health Defense TV. I recommend that you watch it if you have not been following this case. It is a clarion call for open eyes, open ears, open hearts, and action to what has and is happening within our healthcare system today. Grace Schera was a beautiful 19-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was admitted to the St. Elizabeth's Ascension Healthcare Hospital as a precautionary observational stay because of an elevated lab test that could have indicated a blood clot in her lungs, but by chest CT was confirmed to be negative. What was exposed during this trial is that once admitted, the COVID hospital protocols that are still in use today were activated. God, through grace, exposed the transformational paradigm shift that has occurred within the healthcare industry. No longer is the focus patient-centric care with a duty to protect patient rights and do no harm. Instead, the system has become an industry of legalized euthanasia without your consent, disguised as a pandemic care protocol. In the days that followed Grace's admission, what was laid out during this trial is shocking, it's appalling, and it should alarm you to your very core. And I can tell you as a nurse, it does so for me. Today, we are grateful to have Grace's parents, Scott and Cindy Scherer, with us. Scott Scherer is a nationally recognized expert commentator on the medical murder agenda in America and the dangers of incentivized healthcare. Scott's research proves that this practice of medical murder is intentional and by design. Cindy Scherer is a mom to 3 wonderful children, Travis, Jessica, and our amazing Grace. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in special education with a minor in elementary education. Scott and Cindy love the Lord, and like Grace, they lean on Him daily for strength. Losing the trial is like losing Grace Emily all over again for them. Welcome with me, Scott and Cindy Scherer. Hello, and thank you both for being with us today. It is an honor to speak to both of you. I hope that you're blessed where you are.
Thanks, Mick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I see your cat pictures in your intro. Grace and you would have gotten along famously. She was a real cat lover.
Yes, and that is one of the things that drew me to her. Dax is my fluffy baby, and he rules the house, and I let him. So I love it. I love that about her. We want everyone to know who Grace is. We want them to hear her story. We want them to understand the battle of medical tyranny and protocol murders that is being fought and happening in real time. So before we walk down this path, though, I'd love to play this incredible video of Grace's Light Shines, if that's okay.
In a world of quiet dreams, a girl with eyes so bright, Grace danced through life with love, a pure and gentle light. 19 years of beauty, Down syndrome's tender grace, taken by cold decisions in a sterile shadowed place. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the olive skies. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the olive skies. In a world of quiet dreams, a girl with eyes so bright, Grace danced through life with love, a pure and gentle light. 19 years of beauty, Down syndrome's tender grace, taken by cold decisions in a sterile shadowed place. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the autumn sky. Our amazing Grace, a mission born of pain. Through faith and tender memory, her song will still remain.
Wow, that was beautiful. Scott and Cindy, did you guys do that? Because that is absolutely incredibly beautiful.
Amazingly, I was on a podcast, and the producer, who wants to remain nameless, designed that song, and it's hard to believe. People have really done some things stepping up like that, and of course, then putting the pictures to it was easy, but designing that song, I mean, it was a real blessing.
Wow, it is gorgeous. Wow. Scott and Cindy, I want to see if you could share the story of what happened to Amazing Grace. If you would you walk us through that journey, please?
Well, I can start and Scott will continue,
Sure.
but
Sure.
it was the end of September, and Grace and I, as usually this time of the year, we normally just got allergies, and that's really what it started out to be, was allergy symptoms, just the itchy throat, the watery eyes, the sniffles kind of thing. And she had a red nose like Rudolph around the beginning of April, or beginning of October, I'm sorry. So it was September into October, and we had a wedding. My niece was getting married on a Friday evening, and so the big scare of COVID was in the air, and we succumbed to that goofy scare. And so we just thought, well, we don't want to spread COVID to anybody if it is COVID. And so we did a COVID test, and Grace ended up testing positive, so we didn't go to the wedding. And she wasn't sick, except just had these sniffles and things. And I ended up having similar symptoms as well. And 3 days later, then I tested myself, and I ended up having a positive test as well. And we just laid low at home, just kind of rested, because people had said that, COVID gave people the feeling of being tired. And so we just kind of hung around and rested and drank a lot of fluids, took our supplements and so on. And then we ended up depending upon this pulse ox that we put some confidence in to kind of keep a track of our oxygen saturation as we were following the FLCCC protocol. And the evening of the 6th, or that morning of the 6th, I should say, Grace's oxygen saturation hung around 89 to 91, and I didn't get it up higher than that. And so Scott and I just had planned taking her in that morning just to get some supplemental oxygen. And then the nightmare began.
Wow. It's awful. Well, if you don't mind, what happened when you went to the hospital? I know there's a lot to that, and I know there's a lot to unpack there, but do you mind speaking a little bit about what happened when you got there? Because my understanding is it was an observation, and then that evening when she was admitted, it's like they just started on the Precedex.
Well, it didn't happen quite that fast. So when we got into the emergency room, we got to the emergency room about 10 after 2 on October 6th. And
that was after we had gone to the urgent care as well, because we just started out at the clinic after we called her pediatrician, and she had just said, or not she even, just the receptionist there said, since Grace tested positive for COVID, we had to go through urgent care just to get supplemental oxygen. And so that's where we started, was the urgent care facility. And from there,
that was the basic, that was our premise, is just to get oxygen for Grace. They did a blood test when we were in urgent care, and the blood test came back with a high D-dimer. They couldn't actually measure the D-dimer accurately because their equipment didn't go above 5,000, but they just said it was over 5,000. I didn't know what D-dimer was at the time, so the doctor explained that a walk-around D-dimer is about 500, so it was at least 10 times higher than the walk-around number, and it shows the propensity to clot. So they recommended an ambulance ride over to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which is an Ascension hospital. We were at an Ascension urgent care. And, so the idea was to do a CT scan. They couldn't do a CT scan at urgent care. So we ultimately got into the ER about 10 after 2. They did a CT scan around 4:00, and the CT scan came back negative. So Grace did not have clotting. Ultimately, the ER doctor then, they had Grace on a regular cannula at 3 liters. She popped right into the high 90s. She was fine. The ER doctor suggested to check Grace into the hospital as a precautionary for 3 to 4 days on oxygen and a steroid. And I thought, well, that makes sense. I want to do whatever is the best for Grace. Ultimately, I said to them, right when they said that, I said, well, I'll be staying with her. And that was the first objection that we received. In fact, I wish they would not have approved me staying, because I told them that because they said right away, you can't stay because we don't allow visitors in the COVID room. I said, well, then I'll be taking Grace home. And the nurse in the room said that she was going to take that request to the management. And about an hour later, she came back and said, they decided you can stay. And, we got into the room at just after midnight. So we were in the emergency room for about 10 hours. And during that 10 hours, I'll come back to this because the last day of trial, I mean, you saw this, but you didn't see what we showed up on the screen, because I know you were watching the trial, Mick, but there's a very significant thing that happened that last day of trial that was up on the screen for the world to see, because they created a fraudulent situation in the emergency room. I'll come back to that. But, ultimately, I want to just close the loop on Precedex. Grace entered the hospital on a regular cannula. They switched her over to a high flow cannula sometime during the day. Interestingly, I did not know that. Of course, I knew it once Grace got on a BiPAP, but I technically didn't know when they switched her over until one of the attorneys and I were doing the deposition of Dr. Murata. During that deposition, Dr. Murata said that Grace was on a BiPAP the morning of the 7th. And I said, well, no, she wasn't. And I pulled a picture off of my phone that was timestamped at 11:10 in the morning on the 7th. And it showed Grace on a regular cannula. Well, then I zoomed in on the picture and saw, there's actually a Vapotherm machine attached to the cannula. And that was the first time I knew that Grace was already on a Vapotherm, which is also a high flow cannula, that morning. So they switched her to that without my knowledge. Ultimately, I knew it later on, because at approximately 7:00 at night or so, they turned up the high flow cannula to 40. So now air is whistling up Grace's nose that even the nurse from the hospital said it's at 40 miles an hour. And, Grace was very frustrated with that. And that's when she ended up getting switched to the BiPAP. And that's when they used Precedex for the first time. They actually used lorazepam first. Then they combined lorazepam with Precedex, and Grace had her first overdose on October 7th. I want to just go back so I don't leave a cliffhanger relative to what was shown the last day of trial. So, I mean, you watched the trial, you saw that the plaintiff presents their case first, then the defense, and then we have a chance for rebuttal. Well, I was the only rebuttal witness. And one of the reasons that I became a rebuttal witness is because we knew the judge was leaning towards this idea of implied consent. We had a medical battery claim, and to have a battery claim, you have to have an unwanted touching. So we had an unwanted touching. They gave Grace Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine without our knowledge. That was unwanted. And it also has to be without your knowledge. And the judge was leaning towards this implied consent idea. So then it would be with our knowledge, even though we had no knowledge of it. If you give implied consent, that's the equivalent of knowledge in their legal system. So he had told us after the jury left one evening that he's leaning towards that. So we brought in the document. So at 2:27, remember I said we got into the emergency room at 2:10. At 2:27, they claim that Grace orally approved the general consent document. Think this through. Grace has got Down syndrome. I'm the power of attorney. I'm the dad. I'm the advocate. I'm in the ER with Grace. When did they have this conversation with her? It never happened. It's a fraudulent document. And we really thought that the judge would see this and the jury would see it, and it would be the icing on the cake to show this whole thing that they're explaining from the defense perspective. It's all fraudulent. They started with a fraudulent document the 15 minutes after Grace entered the emergency room. Anyway, I went off on a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I wanted to bring you back to why we did that during the trial.
Wow. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that as we're going through this, I really would like to bring out, just listening to the trial. And as I went through, Dr. Shokar at times even said he challenged the record. He challenged the documentation about the Precedex and when it was turned off, and the giving of morphine. And we can get more into that. But as I went through and was listening to that, that was something that really struck me, because, I'm a nurse, worked for 28 years, even managed outpatient infusions and bone marrow transplant units. And I can tell you, if you've got somebody challenging the records and you've got a discrepancy between what's documented, what's being testified to, you can't believe anything in that record at all. And that really struck me through this trial, is that there was a lot of falsification, in my opinion. It was like I couldn't believe any of what they were saying or what was written in that record.
Well, you read it perfectly. I mean, that was one of the things that we thought the jury would see, that, they wanted the records when they were in their favor. Then they wanted the jury to believe them. But when they weren't in their favor, they wanted the jury to believe the testimony instead. It was so obvious. That's why, when the judge gave the instructions to the jury, he goes through this idea of the credibility of the evidence. And the jury, it's an interesting piece. I have my perspective now that I've had a few days to process, which we'll get to. But yeah, it was an interesting piece of the trial that I thought the jury would see, crystal clear they're lying. I mean, look at Nurse Holly McGinnis. One day she says that Grace was never in restraints other than mitts that were put on her after the NG tube. And then she said she forgot to put the purple DNR bracelet on. Then she comes back on direct and says, oh yeah, I was mistaken about the purple bracelet. We didn't even have that policy then. And oh yeah, I must have misremembered about the restraints. How can the jury not see that this woman's a pathological liar? But they sided in favor of the defense.
Yeah, I was shocked by that too, because I was like, if you're misremembering, in fact, I was speaking to several doctors, different people doing boots on the ground reporting, and that's what we kept saying too, is that it's like you're misremembering. Did you not look at the records prior to coming in and giving testimony? And if you're misremembering, then what else were you and these are my words, misrepresenting? Because that's how it came across to me, that it was really that she was just maybe filling in the blanks, or we used to call it in nursing, documentation by CYA, testifying by CYA. That is what it looked like to me. And it broke my heart every time to hear it and to see it. I do want to kind of talk a little bit about the shifting standards in practice of healthcare over the years. They were totally destroyed during COVID, but for 28 years, I kind of see this shifting going along. And this is just my 2 cents. That really the world was kind of captured by this psychological bioterrorism fear. And that gave staff and the physicians permission to just stay out of the rooms. When the staff went into the room, and I've heard this from so many people who were actually in the hospital. I was working in clinical trials. They got in, they did what they had to do, they got out. They pulled, pumps and everything to the outside just so that they didn't have to enter the room. Informed consent, education, advocacy, common sense, critical thinking seemed to just clock out and leave the building. And I call it the Stepford Wives era. And I've never seen anything like this ever before. It was like they were robots. It was like, we follow, we obey, no questioning, the protocol is king, take the shot. And so forgive me, I don't want to put words into people's mouths, but if you could please tell us, in your experience, what was that environment like in the hospital during that time? Because everybody I know was being locked out if they had a loved one in the hospital during COVID.
One of the reasons that one of the reasons we had a trial is, well, there's really two reasons. Number one is we never subscribed to the emergency use authorization protocol. So consequently, there was no PrEP Act immunity. So Grace was overdosed on 3 meds, an illegal do not resuscitate order. That's why we were able to have a trial. Secondarily, I was in the room with Grace from October 6th until the morning of the 10th before I was taken out by an armed guard. There was 47 hours without advocacy. And then Jessica picked back up after we hired an attorney to get her in. Cindy couldn't do it at the time because she was really sick. So being in the room, and I was taking contemporaneous notes, so was Jess, and we transcribed those notes. So our evidence was as credible as the hospitals. In fact, it was more credible because we were there. We had a vested interest in what happened to Grace. Why do I remember specifics of Grace's hospital stay that Dr. Shokar could not? Well, it's because it's my daughter. He's seen thousands of patients since then. So how could he remember? But I remember it because not only was I there, but I transcribed my notes. So then what was the hospital stay like is your question. I just want to give you that backdrop.
No,
there was some exceptional nurses. One of them, I remember her first name was Bryn. I was sleeping on the recliner. She offered me like a mattress topper for the recliner. She was helpful. She's probably the one, although I don't remember for sure, that taught me how to reset the alarms. So there was nurses who got it. That was the exception. I did not see anything where they were trying to stay out of the room, but there was a culture there that it's very easy to explain when I explain my own hospital stay. So the culture was one of arrogance. We know what we've been doing. We know what we're doing. We've been doing this already for 2 years. Just stay out of the way. So it was that arrogant culture that was led by Dr. Zimet. Dr. Zimet came into Grace's room on October 7th. When he entered the room, I was in the bathroom, and he announced that he was there. I said, "Can you just wait a couple minutes? I'm just finishing up." And he said, "No." So I never met Dr. Zimet until depositions. So he would not even wait for me. In fact, then he called me on the telephone to tell me he's recommending tocilizumab. And the guy was the most arrogant doctor I've ever met. I mean, most people have met arrogant doctors. This man, I had to say to him on the phone, "If you don't stop talking to me like this, I'm going to hang up." And he was the infectious disease expert. So he set the tone. He set the culture of that hospital. I went into a different hospital 3 days after Grace died. They asked me, "What would you like to have done?" At St. E's, they just did it and didn't tell me. In this hospital I went to, they said, "What would you like to have done?" It was like the Leave It to Beaver type hospital setting. It was fantastic. And the next morning when the nurse came in, she had a pill cup and she said, "I'd like to go through the pill regimen with you." This is in the hospital I was at. I said, "What do you have in there?" Of course, I'm extremely skeptical because Grace just died 3 days earlier. And she said, "I have a probiotic, a multivitamin, vitamin D, vitamins E, and fish oil." And I said to her, "You got to be shitting me. You guys don't believe in that stuff." And she said, "Well, we do here." So it was just an attitude that they wanted to help the patient. The attitude at St. E's was one that They knew everything, and you just need to be, as Dr. Burdine said in his original report, I wasn't sufficiently docile, and that's why they kicked me out. So that's how I was able to understand St. E's, their mindset and this whole idea of incentivized healthcare. I mean, they are driven by the COVID exposed this. I mean, it's been driven like this for a lot longer than COVID. Standards of care have been driving healthcare since the early 80s, but the direct incentives to pay hospitals for deliberately killing patients has never happened before. It happened during COVID, and they were obviously motivated by those incentives.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a clap on that one, because I've never heard where you're giving monies to hospitals if they keep somebody on a ventilator for a certain number of hours, or if they die with a particular diagnosis. And of course, I mean, I've spoken to different nurses. I've spoke to a nurse in California, was a case manager, and she was like, before they even got to the rapid testing, if they were able to say, oh yes, their oxygen was low, or they had, the criteria for COVID, they were getting the monies up front before they even had the COVID diagnosis. In what world has that ever happened? I've never heard of that before, ever. And
then the tocilizumab.
Oh, go ahead with tocilizumab. Yeah, this got brought up at trial. Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, the tocilizumab drug that they were trying to get Scott to approve for Grace, we found out later from a mom whose daughter had Down syndrome in Connecticut, and she found Grace's story, that tocilizumab, when she got the records, it was a $20,000 medication for one dosage. So that was why the push for that. It wasn't because it was known to work, which Scott found out that, but it was because, again, the incentive to use that medication, just like Precedex. Grace never had to have a sedation drug. Well, they actually called Precedex anxiety med, but she used a CPAP at home. She never had to have an anxiety medication for her to wear her CPAP to bed every night. So for them to even start her on Precedex, saying that she needed that to be calm, to wear the BiPAP, to me was another horrific attitude that they had. Because she was supposed to be just getting a steroid and some supplemental oxygen. But then they started her on that, and that was one of the drugs, like we've learned, she was allergic to at a high dose. And, they almost killed her twice with that. So the Precedex, again, that was a medication that was incentivized. That, remdesivir, the ventilators, tocilizumab, all that. And it's just horrific when you think about it. They were just using all of our loved ones, that had died in hospitals, which were over 1 million. They were test subjects. They were guinea pigs for what these people thought that they had the power to do.
It was, it's really worse than being guinea pigs. So what, very specifically, I want to just nail this down, because our government was the one responsible for COVID. It was not the Chinese. It wasn't a lab leak. It isn't any of this crap that they're trying to tell us. Our government did it, period. And you can prove it just with one statistic: 1.2 million hospital murders in America. There's 200 countries on the planet. We were number one in that statistic. Number two was India at 533,000, with a population that's 4 times that of the United States. So wrap your head around that. It's pretty easy to see that we're the country that started this whole situation. Grace lost her life along with 1.2 million other Americans. She lost her life to create the fear porn to support this crazy virology vaccine agenda that's been going on since 1880. That is the psyop of all psyops. And that's what's going on. And that's why our beautiful daughter lost her life. And then the same government that started this whole COVID nonsense, once you have COVID on the death certificate, guess what they do? Oh, you can have $9,500 courtesy of the government, so they look like they're the good guy, to bury your loved one. I was already connecting the dots right after Grace died. I started researching right away, and I showed Cindy that, and And Cindy right away said, yeah, we're not taking any of their dirty money. And so we never took the $9,500, because by taking the $9,500, we would be agreeing that Grace died of COVID. Grace did not die of COVID. In spite of losing the trial, the trial is not about justice. Think it through. The King of Justice. Who's the King of Justice? Jesus Christ. He was killed because he was the King of Justice. I mean, you don't get justice in the Antichrist legal system. That's not what the trial was about. The trial gave us an opportunity to show to the world what was behind the curtain. And, Grace's death was representative of 1.2 million other families who lost loved ones through this whole COVID nonsense.
That's right. And I'm just going to say we are grateful. We are so grateful that the veil is being lifted, and that God used your family. There was so much that came out from this trial. 12 days, 86 hours, hardcore, intense, and at times very complex testimony. But what stood out like the sore thumb were the breaches that were there, and what was being done in the name of a pandemic, in the name of COVID. And Dr. Burdine, you had mentioned him. He was phenomenal. I do want to play a little bit of a clip from him, and I'd love it if you'd give your thoughts, because we've been talking a lot about, these standards of care and some of the things that were being done in the hospital. And he kind of, was the hammer and kind of hit the nail with it. If we could play that, go ahead.
The number of the breaches of standard of care I identify in my reports are too numerous to count, but some of them stand out. One was the manner by which Father Shara was evicted from the hospital and its impact on the outcome in Grace Shara. And I found this to be shameful conduct on behalf of the hospital. The second issue were the breaches of standard of care related to informed consent. And I find it indefensible that this patient was given medications, very dangerous medications, not theoretically dangerous medications, but medications proved by the medical record to be dangerous to this patient without informed consent. The events on the 13th are very difficult to recognize. The repeated administration of Precedex on the 13th was not just a breach of the standard of care. It was insane. The administration of morphine on 10/13 to a patient who was unconscious, unresponsive, had lost her blood pressure, had no palpable pulse, and whose respiratory pattern was screaming to anybody who would look. The administration of morphine in that situation was worst clinical decision I have ever witnessed in over 46 years of medical practice.
That is atrocious. It's egregious. These are grievous violations. Scott and Cindy, I just want to ask you, what was going through your heart and mind? What is your response to his evidence? I know we've been talking kind of about this, but I mean, he brought up some important things that I was concerned because it escaped the jury's attention, in my opinion.
Yeah, Cindy, why don't you go first? And I want to give a little bit broader view.
First, hearing it from Dr. Burdine from his lips just took me and just shook me to the core, because I had known something had happened in the hospital as the nurse that walked me out with Grace's belongings the day that she died and helped me load the things into the car. She had knelt down by me. And she said, Mrs. Shara, me and several of the nurses don't believe Grace should have died tonight. That's really what started our thought that something happened to Grace. And then when Dr. Burdine, puts it all together, I felt just so sick inside, because here was a 20-year ICU nurse that was watching over Grace. And then we find out Dr. Shokar, he's at least 6 years a medical doctor. It's like, okay, don't tell me that these people wouldn't have known what these medications would have done. But during the trial, what was even brought out more is that Holly McGinnis only had Grace as her patient that day. That was her only patient. For her to not sit with Grace, to calm Grace down, but instead just keep pushing Precedex inside of her, when she knew from the nurse prior that handed over the report, he was one that had Grace on one of the evenings when she had the event where she almost died. So he would have clearly had told her that, she's at this dosage now, you shouldn't go up higher than that because, she had an event before. And yet she, at 7 o'clock with Jessica still in the room with Grace, claims that Grace needed more Precedex because she was not proning. Well, Jessica was in the room with Grace. Grace proned all night long on her belly. She had 98% oxygen saturations. She was just a trooper. Jesse had talked to her that night and said, Mom and Dad really need you to lay on your belly, Grace, because it helps your oxygen saturation. And she did it all night. She was great that morning. Jessica would not have left without Grace doing well. For her to leave and take a shower, Jessica would have never if Grace was having trouble. But then on top of it, during the trial, we heard that Dr. Shokar, when he went to medical school, he studied and focused on toxicology and pharmaceuticals. So don't tell me that this doctor did not know what these 3 medications were going to do to our daughter Grace. That was just the heart punch, the gut punch, the heartbreak that I couldn't believe that the jury did not pick up on that.
And this is, I'm going to just zoom out a bit after I connect some dots. This is what should scare the country because this whole standard of care idea, that's what I want to zoom out on. But I want to just emphasize what happened on Grace's last day. As soon as Holly McGinnis came on shift, promptly, first thing she did, she increased Precedex to the highest dose that Grace had been on previously since October 7th. So she increased it to 1.0. That was the overdose rate that Grace had on October 7th. So as soon as she got in at 7 o'clock, increased it to 1. At 7:30, 1.1, 7:54, 1.2, 8:40. While Jessica was gone, because she told her she had to leave to take a shower, 8:40 increased to maximum allowable dose. That's also the window where she strapped Grace down to the bed and made her defecate in the bed. Then at 11:25, she gave her lorazepam. You'll remember I told you on October 7th, we had Precedex with lorazepam. So now we've got max dose of Precedex 1.4. That's 40% higher than it had ever been through her hospital stay. At 5:46, she gave her another dose of lorazepam. Now she's got 2 doses of lorazepam, which is the overdose event with Precedex at 1.0 on October 7th. At 5:49, 3 minutes later, another dose. So now Precedex is at a 50% higher dose. Precedex at a 40% higher dose, lorazepam at a 50% higher dose. At 4 o'clock, she put in her medical records that Grace, there was no further intervention available. At 5 o'clock, she said Grace was somnolent. At 5:30, somnolent. But then she still gave her 2 more doses of lorazepam after documenting both of those things. Then at 6:09, she documented that Grace didn't have a blood pressure. At 6:15, she gave Grace morphine. That's when she should have said to Dr. Shokar, I can't give her morphine. She has an undetectable blood pressure. But she did. And then she directly disobeyed Dr. Shokar's order to shut off the Precedex before the morphine. The Precedex was not shut off till 6:37. Then she claims that she left promptly at 7 o'clock. Well, Jessica testified, in fact, what happened. And her own time card showed that she left at 7:36. And she said she didn't know that Grace died, even though she said right in that courtroom that the distance between the room and the time card was only about 30 feet from where she was sitting in the courtroom to the back of the courtroom. But she had no idea that Grace died. Grace died at 7:27. Her time card she punched out at 7:36. less than 30 feet away from Grace's door. This woman is a pathological, evil liar. That's the blunt truth. And that's what should scare the jury, because not the jury, that should scare the population, because Dr. Burdine laid it out. Okay. This whole idea of standards of care is a subjective perspective. I just gave you objective evidence. Dr. Burdine gave a subjective opinion as to what killed Grace. They brought in 6 different experts that said everything they did with Grace was fine. They did it perfect because they were all within titration levels. They were all based on orders, so they did everything perfect. They didn't have to give any informed consent to us because it's in an ICU, and that's what their experts testified to. Dr. Burdine testified to what the common sense would tell you should take place in a hospital room. It didn't take place, but they brought in $200,000 plus of experts to testify that the standard of care was followed, and the jury bought it. And that should scare the entire world as to what is going on behind closed doors. And you have to be prepared for a hospital stay, because that's what's going to happen to you. The standard of care is not an objective standard. It's a subjective standard, and they can buy experts to testify on their behalf.
Absolutely. Can I just bring this point up? When they were talking about the Precedex administration, and there was obviously a lack of informed consent. It's a medication. They were saying they were using it for anxiety, but we used it in procedures for sedation. And the fact that they had to give life-saving drugs, norepinephrine, dopamine, and atropine, in my opinion, as a nurse manager, this would have been a reason for disciplinary action, including notification to the board. The lack of informed consent, the fact that they were giving life-saving drugs and nobody knew about it. Number one, they started her at a dose of 1 milligram of Precedex, which was close to the max, on a patient who was drug naive with Down syndrome. That is criminal, because the rule of law, or not the rule of law, but the rule in the ICU was you start low and slow. I would have started her at 0.3 of a milligram. Number two, they were giving life-saving drugs, advanced cardiac life-saving drugs, and they were having to maintain her hemodynamic stability. They had to maintain her blood pressure. They had to maintain her heart rate. Not only did they not tell you, but the doctors and the nurses didn't pass that along. They acted like, oh, well, there's nothing, big or impressive about that. But this is unlawful. And we saw no one even recognized that every time Grace got to a Precedex level of 1, she crashed. So that was indefensible. And I just, every time I was listening to them, I was like spitting my water at the computer screen, because I was like, I've never seen such an egregious, intentional violation of just the lack of critical thinking. It infuriates me to my very core, and I'm so sorry that your precious daughter had to experience that.
Well, I'm sorry too. I mean, Grace died so other people can live, and that's the simple message we have. So. Cindy, you should comment. I'm at a loss for words right now.
Just the arrogancy of the nurses that were in that courtroom. There weren't that many that came to support Holly McGinnis, which was pretty amazing to me, because I thought, of all the nurses that were outside that room the night that Jessica tries to get someone in there to help with Grace, there was 30 nurses out there. They had explained that there was that ICU that was set up. It was just a regular floor, but they had 3 wings, 10 beds each. And they at least had one-on-one, one nurse to one, patient. Sometimes it was 1 to 2, but with shift change, there was probably about 30 nurses out there at least. And so just the idea that none of those nurses came to help Grace. And if they were really supportive of what Holly had done, which I don't believe the majority of them did. The few that came, I believe there was maybe 3 or 4 that came regularly to be with her. That was, surprising to me because I thought, okay, you think you have everybody here backing you up, but there weren't that many. But the whole idea of how these nurses could sit there and think that what they did to Grace, not coming to her rescue, or even how did they treat her? The Allison Barkholtz, who was the one that kicked Scott out of the room, she had such an arrogancy about her on the stand that she actually called Scott an asshole at the end of her time on the stand. And I was surprised the judge didn't reprimand her for that, because that was really, to me, a terrible thing to do. She had said earlier she had no problem with Mr. Shera, but yet she had to, put that quick jab in before she left the witness stand. But it was just, it was heart-wrenching, because I thought to myself, the hours that Grace was without advocacy, if they looked at Scott, the way that Allison Barkholtz did, called him an asshole, how did they treat Grace during that time? She was such a sweet person. She wouldn't have hurt somebody, but yet she told Dad that these nurses were idiots. Grace would never do that unless something, very terrible was going on. And we had heard that from another family who lost their beautiful son that had Down syndrome, named Moses. He called the nurses an evil, he said that they were, I'm trying to think what the word was.
No, he used the F word.
Yeah. He said they were fuckers. And they wouldn't. These children that have Down syndrome, they don't do that kind of thing unless something terribly bad is happening to them. And so Grace would have not done that unless something was happening. And Moses would have said that if something wasn't happening. So that's what tears at my heart, is just wondering, how were they treating Grace? We know they were treating people that were not vaccinated, around the world terribly, and telling them they deserve this because they didn't get vaccinated. So what actually went on? And I pray that one of these nurses that was there somehow comes forward now that the trial's over and just really shed some light on what was going on.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And I just want to say one other thing about the trial. Actually, 2 other things about the trial. It gave you a perspective as to where our country is at. It's hard for me to be unbiased relative to the trial because I was involved in it. But if I try to step back, I've talked with a few people who watched the whole thing. You watched the whole thing, Megs. I mean, I thought we presented a better case, better witnesses, better experts. Everything was better, and yet only one of the 12 jurors sided in our favor. And, so that shocked me. I'm not surprised, but it did shock me. And they only deliberated for 90 minutes, probably less. So that shocked me too. But it's likely representative of the true percentage of the population that's awake to what's going on. So, our population is so easily duped because we've been programmed. And then the other thing that they accepted, the things that we just talked about are egregious, but they accepted something that's even more egregious. The experts, and you heard them, Dr. Burdine was the anomaly. And Dr. Burdine, he was an absolute gift. He told the truth, but their experts lied. Their experts said, and the jury bought it, that a doctor can unilaterally place a DNR on a patient without consent, without a witness, without a signature, and without a DNR bracelet.
Yes.
That should put fear into anybody. I'm talking about a healthy fear now. I'm not talking about satanic fear. It should put a healthy fear in anybody to be prepared. Don't go to a hospital unless it's an absolute have to, but then you've got to be prepared, because this is the reality in the American hospital system today.
And I'm so grateful that you brought that point up, because I have never, ever in my lifetime ever heard that a do not intubate, which I heard a lot during COVID, pre-authorizing ventilation, that was like the term that was being used, that would equal a do not intubate. And the other thing is that a do not intubate would equal a do not resuscitate, because he used the words, Dr. Shokar did, that it was futile, or that it wouldn't make any difference to do, resuscitation measures. And so he was using that to justify not performing CPR. Never have I ever seen do not intubate equal do not resuscitate. And the fact that they never even told you, and the way that he presented it in his testimony, to me, showed that there was prejudice and that there was an intent there. I can't see it any other way. And I think you're right. We should all be shocked, and our eyes should be wide open to say, wait, how can the doctor be the one to say, well, you don't want to pre-authorize a ventilation, so now I've made your loved one a do not intubate, and that's going to equal a do not resuscitate. That should never, ever happen. It should raise everybody's hackles, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I do believe that this, we are grateful, because to me, this is the wake-up call. We're now needing to gird our loins. We're needing to press forward. We're needing to walk through that door that God has used your family through grace to crack open. We must speak out often and everywhere. And Scott, you said at the press conference that this is the lifting of the veil on COVID, and that those with ears should hear. And I want to play a clip from Warner Mendenhall at the press conference, and then I want to talk about what the future looks like.
Problem of the COVID blindness that's out there, and that we were going into an environment where people did not want to see the truth at all. We see that there's a lot of things still going on out there. We have not completely lifted the COVID veil. We haven't completely lifted the veil of fear, and we have a long way to do that. And I'll tell you what I have seen in this process, the entire COVID process, is that fear has been used against us. It's been used to destroy our good nature. It's been used to destroy our relationships. It's been used to take away rights throughout this country. And I think that's one of the core issues here that has been exposed and revealed by this trial, is what has happened to medicine in the United States of America. When you go into a hospital now, this trial shows you sign your rights away. You consent to everything, including a do not resuscitate order, basically. We had experts come on and say that, no, we didn't have them come on. I'm sorry, the defense had them come on and say, oh, they can make the decision because of something called futility. So I think that this trial is incredible in the sense that it paints a very accurate picture of what has happened in healthcare. And it creates a roadmap of what people face when they go into healthcare. What are you signing off on? You are kept in the dark. You're kept in the dark about your medications. You're kept in the dark about your treatment. You're kept in the dark about the risks versus benefits. All of that you're kept in the dark of. This family did not know, despite asking, what drugs Grace was on, what drugs they were giving her, what drugs caused her to have 3 overdoses in less than a week. They weren't even told of the overdoses. They were saving her right in front of Scott. Didn't tell him we have a life-threatening situation on our hands. So I just think that this case opens a crack in the system, lifts the veil on healthcare, and I really think that, and I'm very, very hopeful that people understand this deterioration of where we stand as people in all institutions, but especially in healthcare. We are not being treated in a human way. Protocols are being overlaid in terms of the treatment. Protocols are taking away the doctor-patient relationship. Protocols have destroyed what used to be the art of medicine, and now it's the protocols of medicine.
Scott and Cindy, I want to ask you, where do we go from here? How can we unite? And what does the future look like as far as moving this forward?
So do you want to go first, Cindy?
Oh, you can go ahead, Scott.
Well, the only future going forward is through repentance. And the reason is because we got here by rejecting God and relying on the state to take care of us. So the state, through Medicare and Medicaid, has got us to, Satan knows that we are generally lazy and we don't want to take accountability. So we turn over our rights very quickly to the state. And so we rely on the state for our retirement with Social Security. We rely on the state for our medical with Medicare when we're 65. Well, we've got to take that back. And the only way to take that back is to acknowledge that either we tacitly or directly let our guard down, that we relied on man instead of God. And so consequently, the only way out of this is repentance, period. There's no other way out of it. We're not going to get out of this by having a new king, by having a new HHS secretary. None of that is going to fix it. It's laughable when people start relying on it. We just, that's going from the frying pan into the fire. We can't get out of it by man's ways. And, so that's why I see it as the only way out of this is repentance. God will, we know God wins. Everybody likes to use that saying that God wins. Well, it isn't just a saying. Satan is under God, but we're allowing Satan to have free reign right now. And that's the only way to get it back is to individually take responsibility. So what about a practical level? Well, I'll just give you a couple of things very easily on a practical level. If you still have medical insurance, stop it. Drop your medical insurance. And you say, well, I can't do that. I mean, the medical insurance is in bed with CMS. So CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I mean, so you just process, once you don't have medical insurance, your critical thinking comes back to life. So you've got to get rid of your medical insurance. That's the blinding flash of the obvious. And, then you've got to get a doctor and nurse that is not in the system. So what does that mean? On Grace's website, ouramazinggrace.net, we have a link to join the wedge. And in Join the Wedge, it's all doctors and nurses who have agreed to not take payments from CMS. So they do not accept Medicare and Medicaid patients. They only, it doesn't mean they won't take those patients, but they're cash pay only. So then they're not bound by the system standards of care. They can do what's right for the patient. I mean, so that's how we can take things back. We've got to say no to the state controlled systems, period.
And I think that it also, another thing that is vital is that we pray for these people that are in these positions that believe that they are God, that they can choose to end a life when they choose, versus doing what they've been trained to do, which is to use medication and medicines to heal people, not to hurt people. I think there's power in prayer. I also know that the devil is real. I mean, sadly, we've found that out with losing our son, Travis, and the medications that he got put on, and now with Grace. I mean, as a young kid, I remember there was a song that our mom and dad taught us, which was the Pebbles and Bam Bam song about Let the Sun Shine In. I don't know if you ever remember that song, but it's all about the devil. And, it's just a cute little song, but I didn't realize the power of the devil until we lost our two children. And you see that when we were sitting in that courtroom, you could feel the darkness. You could feel the heaviness of the evil one in there. When Holly McGinnis was on the stand, when Choker was on the stand, and they just lied and lied and lied. And when the defense just kept twisting stuff and trying to look at our depositions and try to disprove what we said, to cut into our credibility. But yet they were the ones that just lied, and it just broke my spirit. I knew God was still in control. That wasn't at all what I felt, but I just really felt the heaviness of the devil in that courtroom. And then when you see the verdict come back, it's like, what happened? I mean, so many people are so far from the Lord. They're so selfish. I mean, for this jury to not give Grace the respect that she deserved to sit down and discuss those questions. She was such a precious soul. She would have just lit up that hospital if they would have had the chance, or not that if they had the chance, if they would have just taken the chance to know who she was. I mean, she would have shined his light on them. But even 4 years later, these nurses, they knew that this was going to end up going to trial, and yet none of them have come forward. None of them said sorry to us. None of them, even looked at us as though we could be telling the truth. I just don't think that this world is very lost. And God says there's, the path is narrow and few will find it. And you truly feel that just even in this trial, what amount of people are really following him.
Very, very well said.
Yes, absolutely. My heart is broken for you, but I know that through this, that you have given strength to many. I'm just going to say our group in Oklahoma has found strength from this. The other groups that I am involved with have talked about the strength and the boldness and the ability to pick up and move forward and continue to, expose and tell their stories because of what happened to Grace, and because you brought it to trial, because God used your family to expose this evil that is in the hospital system, that is the hospital system right now, and what was brought through COVID. The Judge McGinnis, had some very kind words at the end of the trial. I'd like to play that really quick if I could.
Sounds
I just want to say to you, Mr. Scherer, and maybe to your family, I never met Grace, but I'm glad I got to be a part of her for these last 3 weeks in a sort of an unfortunate way. And I know that the world was a better place with her in it, and our community was. Good luck to everybody. We're adjourned.
Scott and Cindy, I want to give you both the last word. Anything that you want to say, and anything, it doesn't matter. I want to give the last word to you.
I just want everybody to know that Grace was one of many, that there were so many other people that lost their beautiful lives. And it wasn't the same combination that Grace had, Presidex, lorazepam, and morphine, but it was for codeine, bromide, midazolam, fentanyl. I mean, they used drugs that were intentionally taking people's lives. I mean, they were end of life death row meds. They were being requested from these prisons and brought to these hospitals during COVID. I mean, it is so deep, the horrific agenda that was going on. And so we are here fighting and standing for everybody that lost a loved one, Grace included. And so if everybody just keeps all of us in their prayers, because we are one of many, and our hearts go out to everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, we will.
I would say that I would just add just a little bit to what Cindy said. We were picked I don't know why God picked us, but he did. And, when we realized what we were involved in, we saw that Genesis 50:20 was what we're called under, which says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives, which is happening today. And Grace's death has not been in vain. And, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for what he's done, the path that we've walked. I mean, I would not wish this on my worst enemy. We're working for Dr. Shokar's kids, Holly McGinnis's kids. We're working for, we don't want anybody to lose their best buddy. And it's not just about your best buddy. It's about you. Every single person listening to that trial, and we're all going to be non-contributing members of society someday. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to eliminate the non-contributing members of society. So all of us are either going to be disabled or elderly someday. So we're going to be in that camp, that the model that they have embedded in the medical industrial complex is all going to apply to each one of us someday. And, if you can wake up to that, Grace's death truly will not be in vain.
Just one last thing that I'd like to add is, they had tried to get a pre-authorization for a ventilator for Grace that whole time she was there. And after we lost her, we learned about those ventilators and what the incentive was. And Dr. Burdine, he really shed some light on what happened to Grace in the end. And the fact that she wasn't on a ventilator, and really didn't need a ventilator until they decided that they were going to give her the morphine. So I think in my own mind, I just think that hopefully this will give some insight into the families that lost their loved ones who were on ventilators, what they were clearly doing, what they had given them to cause the demise. I mean, the 100% oxygen that they were pumping into Grace. I mean, what did that do to Grace's lungs? What was that doing to other people's lungs? So I think overall, there's just so much of a door that's been opened to kind of clearly see what could have been happening to so many other loved ones, that did end up getting on ventilators. Grace wasn't, like I said, but it was just another door that opened to see, okay, what was the intention here? And the agenda for getting the money and all that just played into such a big incentive during this time of COVID. And it just breaks my heart.
God bless you both. Thank you so much for your strength, your courage. Thank you for showing the world the beautiful daughter that you had, Grace. And thank you for opening up your family to us. I feel like you're not just my friend, you're my family, even though we've never met. And I just want you to know that we love you. And we're grateful for everything that you did. And we're grateful to Grace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott and Cindy, it was an honor. It was an honor to speak to you today. It was an honor to get to be with you today. Thank you. Thank you for coming on and for sharing us the life of our amazing Grace. I really appreciate everybody who showed up in the chat today. Thank you. We're together. We're going to move forward. And we're going to use Grace as our light, because she truly was a beautiful light, and she shines bright in heaven. And someday I will meet you, Grace, as I go to be with the Lord someday. I will see you all next time. Remember, resistance is not futile, and blessings to you all, always.
stand up, speak out, get involved, and let's be intentional.